So it's these poverty smoothing activities that nonprofits are doing. And so I see the role of nonprofits really as poverty smoothing, right? Because they're not changing, right? They're not changing the capitalist structure, which is going to continue to impoverish, coffee communities. So, is there a role for that? Yes, I think there's a role to have any help that you can get to make your life a little bit better. I promote that and I support that. Do I think that it's changing the status quo? No, I don't.
If you're a coffee producer, roaster, or cafe owner ready to sell more coffee, this one's for you. The Sell More Coffee Mastermind Group is a 3-month online program starting this August. Meeting every 2 weeks for 2 hours, we'll focus on finding new customers, retargeting existing ones, refining your pricing, sharpening your messaging, and using ChatGPT to help you stay ahead in a volatile market. Whether you sell green coffee, roasted coffee, or brewed coffee, B2B or B2C, this is a practical way to get strategic. Join the success of the people who have already been through these mastermind groups. Apply now at mapitforward.coffee/group coaching or click the link in the show notes. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 2 of a 5-part series with Nora Burkey from the Chain Collaborative, a nonprofit based in the US. We are talking about, will the development sector survive in coffee? This was all sprung from me wanting to do this series, was all sprung from this kind of question that I have about 2025 and essentially like, what the fuck are we doing? I don't understand how we arrived here. I don't understand what we're doing. I don't understand how we as an industry survive given everything that's going on. So, Nora, we in the last episode talked about the history of the development sector. And in this episode, we're going to talk about why do we need development work in the coffee industry? This is the part that confuses me. Because I perhaps am naive. And I'm going to lean on the side that I am naive here. But if capitalism is working, every stakeholder is producing stuff and selling it so that they can continue to do the same thing in the next financial year or the next season or whatever it is. In the coffee sector, it seems as though we need a stopgap, which seems to be the development work. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, I think capitalism is not working. So
I agree with you. But if it was supposed to work very well, I feel like we are in, and this is why I say 2025, right? We are in the year that is starting to reveal that this thing that we call capitalism has left us up shit creek without a paddle, and we are starting to see that, right? Mm-hmm. The hope was that the gaps that were left in the coffee sector were going to be filled by, it wasn't going to be the governments that filled in those gaps, and corporates didn't want to fill in their gaps because their priority is not making sure that things work well. Their priority and they're at the behest of their shareholders. So the responsibility was either going to be left to small business or it was going to be left to the development sector. And small business can't really afford to take on this responsibility because they're barely surviving anyway. And the development sector, it seems, has taken on, is what's filling this gap. Now, the development sector, from what most people who are listening to this are thinking one of two things. They're thinking, but people that work in the development sector are just really kind, hyper empathetic people who want to do good for the world, or they're evil corporate people who want to go and be corrupt in the global south. And so when I look at this, I think, 1, I'm confused, 2, I'm naive, and 3, if this hasn't worked, why do we need the development sector? Because coffee producers seem to be worse off today than they were 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are legitimately confused by how we haven't been able to solve this problem. And so if the development sector is there to help fix that, why do we need the development sector in the coffee industry?
Great. Well, again, I think, from the last episode, I think my take is that the nonprofit sector is, I mean, some people might think that the goal is to fix the issues. That's not my sense of what nonprofits are doing. I think that, so to kind of go back to one of your questions of like, if this is working, if capitalism is working for coffee producers, why do we need nonprofits? And I would say, the theory of neoliberalism and leaving things more to corporates and less to governments, less government regulation, less government control of development, and more just leave things to the market. The theory was that we wouldn't need something like nonprofits. The problem is that the gap between rich and poor did not close under more corporate control. Instead, it widened, and so nonprofits have been used by corporations as kind of like a putting lipstick on a pig kind of thing, right? And
Right.
and yet there are also a lot of small nonprofits, just like small businesses, who within this sea that we're swimming in really are trying to do good work. I think that, so of course, you have a system in place that's for nonprofits to exist. That system can be used by some, people can be corrupt, and of course you can use the nonprofit system for that, and we've seen that. Not necessarily in coffee. I mean, yes, in coffee, but there's also really terrible, egregious cases in other sectors. But you can use anything. You can use government, the private sector, the public sector, for that. But I think the reason that nonprofits exist now and how they exist right now, I think if capitalism was working for people, I think you'd still see kind of the nonprofit civil society space. But what you'd probably see is focused on things like the arts, and beautification of our communities, and things that are just like cultural, and we're new forms of education and experiential education. You'd see things that were just like developing our society, right? But with capitalism the way it is, and how it functions, and how it continues to impoverish coffee farmers, then you have nonprofits that are not focusing on cultural events and coffee communities. They're focusing on not even really poverty reduction. That's their goal, but they're not going to achieve it because that's not how the coffee sector is designed. That's not going to happen. So it's these poverty smoothing activities that nonprofits are doing. And so I see the role of nonprofits really as poverty smoothing, right? Because they're not changing, right? They're not changing the capitalist structure, which is going to continue to impoverish, coffee communities. So, is there a role for that? Yes, I think there's a role to have any help that you can get to make your life a little bit better. I promote that and I support that. Do I think that it's changing the status quo? No, I don't. And so the sort of nonprofit status quo right now is upsetting, but it's no more upsetting than private public sector. It's part of it. So yeah, I do think the sense of people feeling frustrated of like, nonprofits are corrupt, we can't trust them, is probably because there's this belief that they are supposed to fix things and make your life somehow better. And the reality is it's kind of it's poverty, income smoothing. It's like doing the absolute best they can with very little resources to do it, and not really being able to change the broader, picture, status quo.
I think the other reason that people think that they're corrupt is because we look at and everything I'm about to say is in my opinion, for all the lawyers out there listening. I think the reason is because you look at a nonprofit like the SCA, and when a nonprofit like the SCA's, the CEO is getting paid $700,000+ a year, and the staff are getting paid exorbitant compared to the actual nonprofit sector. I think that gives people reason to look at that and say, wait, what's going on here?
Uh-huh.
Farmers are struggling. Roastery owners are struggling. Cafe owners can barely make ends meet. Baristas are making no money. Everyone's going out of business. But these motherfuckers are getting paid $700,000 a year? How is that okay? And this is where people turn around and say, wait, hold on. They're not even touching the coffee. So if the producers aren't getting paid what they need to get paid to keep producing the coffee, are we going to have an industry left? If most of these producers leave because they look at something like the SCA and they say, wow, this seems to be a great rich man's game, and we're not even invited to the party. These expo events are being held in cities that producers can't afford the plane ticket to. This, Nora, is why people look at what's going on and they say, hold on, what the fuck are we doing? Go ahead.
Yeah. I understand it. And I do think there's a higher standard that nonprofits are held to. You see it with cooperatives as well. People get very angry when, cooperatives are corrupt, somehow less angry when larger estates are corrupt. It's almost like they expect it. And so it's like, it's fine if there's a large estate owner who's corrupt, but it's not fine if the cooperative is, dealing with corruption. So, and it's the same, like, it's okay. I was ended by, how much Yanis is making. I can't imagine a farmer.
As am I. Just hold on.
Yeah.
Just to say something there. As am I. Somebody who dedicates all of this time to educating and informing, and my guests spend all of this time of their time coming on here to inform the entire industry about what's going on in our sector, and we don't get paid a cent to do it. We're doing more. And when I say we, who? Me and the people who come on this podcast give of our time as a sort of public service to inform the entire industry, the entire supply chain. I get visited by governments from all over the world who see this project as a danger to their success. And corporations see this podcast as a threat. And Yanis makes $700,000 a year? What the fuck are we doing? I'm sorry. I interrupted you there.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I mean, so I agree, and it's, to me, it's not okay. What I would just say is, in terms of like the nonprofit sector, like I said, people can use nonprofits to do corrupt things, and of course that's what's happening. I don't think that we need to say the whole nonprofit project, an NGO project, is like, it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We don't need to say that this whole nonprofit project is wrong, but rather point out the things that are happening in some nonprofits. And it's the same thing that would, we're not going to say, okay, well, some people say, corporations should not exist, and throw that out. But in general, as the private sector, like, we're not saying companies and for-profit businesses should not exist, right? Just because there are some for-profit businesses that do the wrong things. And so I guess that's my take on it, is because my experience with the majority of nonprofits is the people that I speak to, they're not making anything like that. In fact, people leave jobs they love, nonprofit jobs they love, because the nonprofit simply can't afford to pay them more, and so they go more into the private sector, and where they can get paid more, and for their families, and things like that. And so people are, and so there's actually a big challenge with nonprofits maintaining talent, because they don't have financing. And I know that's kind of one of the reasons that SCA is stating they need to pay people more. But there's a price you can pay for talent, and then there is a offensive price you can pay for. I don't even know if it's talent, So it's just
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How do we know if we're looking at that, right? Like, there are good people. Not all of them that work at the SCA I view as good people, but not all of them are shitty people either, right? Yeah. How do we look at a nonprofit and assess? Because there are people that are listening to this that are saying, okay, let's say at the end of the year, I have $1,000 that I can give to a nonprofit. That 1,000 is like millions of dollars to a corporation. That 1,000 is something that they're going to take out of their own pay packet to give to a nonprofit. How do they find the right nonprofit to be able to do that for? Because I imagine that if people knew that $100 or $1,000 that they were able to give to a nonprofit that was actually doing the right work, more people would want to give money to a nonprofit. But we're so disenfranchised after listening to the kinds of salaries that people are getting at the SCA and looking at the debauchery, in my opinion, of what some nonprofits are doing. The people are just heartbroken about the whole sector. So how do you help us understand how you figure out who the right nonprofits are and who they aren't?
Yeah, it's hard because, it's, this kind of goes back to the concept of why, in some ways, nonprofits exist in the first place. There's kind of like, there's a business philosophy of like the social contract, right? And so businesses, it really exist because consumers allow them to exist, right? And give them their money and their customers. And so then the company sort of has to give back in a certain way, and part of giving back is like improving the community. The problem is not everyone decides what's going to improve the community, and the same thing in coffee. People don't agree on what is the right thing to do, and so in some ways it's up to the business that has the money, or they wanting to focus more on economic development and environmental, social. So in some ways, it's like the mission of the nonprofit you can look at. But at least in the U.S., and I know the system in the U.S. is because we're a U.S.-based nonprofit, but it's similar in other places. One thing that we have to do is report on our how much money we're taking in every year, and then how much we're actually paying for salaries or services. And so you can see that it's public. And so that's one place to look. However, it's still complicated because people don't quite, I think, are sort of misinformed about how nonprofits function. And so there's this idea of like, well, okay, if I give $100, I want 98 of those dollars to go directly to farmers. Right. That's not how it works, in part because people don't trust cash transfers. Probably listeners don't even realize this, that they don't trust cash transfers. If I were to say, okay, give money to my nonprofit and I will give $98 of those 100 directly to a farmer, there's going to be questions of, well, are they just going to drink it away? Or like, what are they going to do with it? Are they really going to know how to use it? Right. Again, patronizing, but we do have this sense in the, global North, that some people that, I was going to say it, poor people don't know how to use money, right? You hear that, right? And so if I were to say that that's what our nonprofit does, people would be upset. And yet that's what they're sort of claiming they want when they're like, I want 98% to go towards the farmer. So, okay, so what do nonprofits then do in some cases? Best example is training, right? If you think, and a lot of people do, that one of the best ways to increase income of farmers is to train them in coffee quality and processing, right? Well, how does the money flow in that case? You're going to give money to a trainer. You're going to pay for a service to transport farmers to the training location. You are probably going to buy lunch, right? These types of things. And so your expenses become transportation. They become food. They become materials for the training. They become paying the trainer. And so when you look at the expenses, right, you might have the salaries, which I don't know, maybe let's say they're 30%, right? But then since half your projects are training and half the money goes towards trainers, then you have upwards of now 50% of your budget is going towards salaries or contractors. And so that's going to look like you're spending half your money on people, and you are, but that's in part because what this world like kind of views as, you know, you have to ask yourself, like, is this the nonprofit's fault, or is this also part of like how I view that change happens? If you're going to tell me that you think the best way to increase farmer income is by training them in coffee quality, then you better accept that the majority of the money is going directly to people, to you know, their salaries and their training fees, and it's not going to farmers. So, and if you want to state that you think all the money should go to farmers, then you better stop saying that, you know, you think that farmers don't know how to like spend their, you know, don't know how to spend money or don't know how to develop, or that, oh, if we give money to farmers, they're just going to cut down trees and do more deforestation, right? Which is what you hear people say. And so it's complicated, right? And so I think to choose a nonprofit well is hard, because you have to educate yourself first about what you really believe and what you're seeking. Otherwise, you're going to give money to the most convincing fundraiser, quite honestly.
And that's where it gets complicated.
Yeah.
And you set us up perfectly for the next episode. In the next episode, we're going to talk about how the money flows through the development sector in more detail. So join us for that episode, folks. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. This episode is part of a 5-part series produced by Mapper Forward. Check the full playlist and guest details in the show notes, as well as how you can support our work in the coffee industry. Become a premium YouTube subscriber, explore our Patreon and any brands we've partnered with to bring you this podcast. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really does help us grow our audience.